and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's show, after the earthquake, relief efforts continue in Nepal as the country looks ahead to the long process of rebuilding. Tragedy remembered. 7 years after the devastating earthquake, we visit Wenchuan, China, and find out locals are dealing with the legacy of the disaster. And boosting economy. China's central bank, the People's Bank of China, cut interest rates for the third time in 6 months in a bid to stimulate the growth. And what's going to happen next? We start tonight's show in Nepal, which has been rocked once again by yet another strong 7.5 tremor just earlier today, followed by 6.2 magnitude aftershock. It's a hard blow to a country already struggling to get back on their feet after a devastating earthquake, which killed thousands just a little over 2 weeks ago. So far, today's earthquake has claimed dozens of lives and also injured more than 1,000.
Nature strikes again. A 7.5 magnitude earthquake shook an already stricken Nepal this afternoon, just 2 weeks after last month's devastating tremor that left more than 8,000 dead. The latest tremor has added to the body count, even across the border in India and China. In Kathmandu, it sent people rushing out onto the streets in panic.
Just now, the big quake came, and we all ran out of the building to keep ourselves safe. We are just trying to contact with our family members whether they are okay or not.
Over 16,000 people were already injured in the previous quake, and at least 3 million are now in need of basic supplies to survive. After shocks since the April 25 earthquake, about 160 in total, has made rescue and relief efforts difficult and slow. Massive landslides and avalanches in some popular trekking areas have also forced suspension of rescue work and cut off remote areas. Many survivors have been grateful for the swift international response, but have complained that their government has been inefficient.
Luckily, the government has lots of help from the international community, from the multilateral agencies, from our neighbors India and China. So, the government just needs to get over its inertia and lethargy to treat this like a very, very serious emergency.
China has sent over 400 relief workers and is helping formulate a post-disaster health and epidemic prevention plan. Beijing has given 650 tons of emergency relief supplies such as tents, generators, and water purifying equipment. China has also said it plans to aid Nepal in reconstruction and resettling the earthquake victims.
As a neighbor of Nepal, China has extended unselfish help to us. The Chinese rescued people who were trapped and provided them with tents, food, and medicine. The most important thing is that the Chinese have rescued those who were trapped. We hope China can continue to help us with Nepal's post-quake reconstruction and epidemic prevention.
Nepal has said it has set aside 200 million towards the cost of the first phase of reconstruction, which could cost as much as $2 billion. That figure could well increase in the coming days, as the extent of the casualties and damage of today's quake are gradually unearthed.
And for more on what's going on in Nepal right now, we are joined by Mr. Lawrence Rom, who is the founder of Himalayan Consensus Institution, which is aimed at protecting ethnic diversity, culture, and also the environment in Nepal. And also we are joined by Professor Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics from the University of International Business and Economics. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, United States, we have Mr. Prashant Jha, who is the associate editor of Hindustan Times. He's originally coming from Nepal, also writing a book about the battles of New Republic, which is a contemporary history of Nepal. Welcome to the three of you, gentlemen. This is a very devastating day once again for the country of Nepal. Another aftershock, 7.5, followed by another one, 6.2. Any of this would, in a way, demonstrate a whole country, but this is so many that we've already seen. What does it mean, Mr. Jha, if I could have your opinion coming from Nepal, for the already hard reconstruction and also rehabilitation process?
As you said, it's tragic. You know, Nepal does not need more tragedies. We have just been, we have not recovered from what happened on April 25th. As your report said, millions are homeless. Over 600,000 houses are destroyed. Monsoon is 6 weeks away, and people need shelter immediately in remote hills and remote villages. Because of landslides, many areas have been inaccessible. And to top it all, we suddenly have this new earthquake. And this just sets back the relief reconstruction efforts that had just been launched. You know, we had moved from rescue and relief to reconstruction now, but we will now have to again go back to rescue to get those people who have suffered today.
Exactly.
So over 40 people have already died because of today's quake, and it sets back our efforts.
Yes, Mr. Braun, I think Mr. Jha mentioned something that I need to follow up with you as well, which is what should be the priority now? Reconstruction and also rehabilitation had been decided as the target, but now, once again, devastating earthquakes happened. When they are mixed up, can the Nepalese handle it with the current capabilities?
Well, first of all, it has to be a coordinated response. And one of the critical things right now is at the first stage 2 weeks ago, it was a rescue and relief effort in which international aid was there. Much of that has returned because it's past the immediate relief and rescue.
Right.
Now we have disaster in Namche Bazaar area, Sinpalchok. These are areas where probably they're going to need to have emergency aid once again, helicopters coming back. However, it has to be a coordinated response, and this is where some of China's experience from Wenchuan is very valuable. Right now there are medical teams in the Kaveri area, which is very near these two spots,
right,
and the capacity building of local NGOs, community leaders, medical teams that already exist there is very critical because these are remote areas. This is not just like the earthquake that struck Kathmandu. It's in the villages, and you need village people to get there and to respond.
While the rescue and relief efforts are continuing as a result of the aftershocks that we witnessed today, the important thing is to look ahead. After all, this country needs to survive and needs to survive well for its people. Professor Liu, here's the thing. The Nepalese government has already proposed a $2 billion fund for the reconstruction of the country after the earthquake. And now it is talking about at least $200 million for the immediate actions. Where does the money come from? Will it come from sufficiently international community?
Well, I think first they have to offer whatever they have, and the commitment of $200 million is a very strong gesture from home, and because they are still heavily relying on international aid even during normal times, so therefore the world community will have to offer their hands, and merely by self-reliance they cannot come across.
Absolutely. We know there's going to be a finance conference tomorrow on Wednesday about exactly how this fund will be established and will be provided by the international community. But let me go back to you, Mr. Jha, because there has been debate, and that has been reported also in the international press, about what is the right process to go, what is the most efficient way, because the Prime Minister have this relief fund. This is the government way. Meanwhile, some donor organizations and so-called friendly countries do not necessarily want to go through this process in order to donate. And that is seeing a, in a way, showdown, some even use the word at the moment, about money not coming in, and the government is not necessarily having the support of NGOs, particularly international ones. Help us to understand your understanding of this situation. What does it mean, really, for our mission?
Absolutely. You know, there is this tension. The government wants to control the process, and you know, Nepal has an elected government. The state is a legitimate democratic state, and it wants to control and coordinate the relief and reconstruction effort. So it argues that the aid that is coming in and the pledges, the financial pledges that have been made by the international community, should translate into fund transfers into the Prime Minister's relief fund. But the many sections of the international community feel that the state has been corrupt, the government is dysfunctional. Your report talked about the inertia and the lethargy. So there is a temptation in sections of the international community to bypass the government and to create a parallel process and go through NGOs and INGOs, right? And this is something that the government is not comfortable with. And what has happened is that despite enormous financial pledges that have been made by many donor countries, a lot of that money has not come into the Prime Minister's Relief Fund. It has gone into, those pledges have gone into NGOs and INGOs. So there is this tension that is emerging, and I think the solution has to be, there has to be a balance. The government cannot be bypassed. At the same time, the government cannot control every element of the international assistance that is coming in, and it must bring the international community into confidence.
Well, this is very interesting, a balance you're talking about, Mr. Jha. And by the way, what exactly is the international community we are talking about? Mr. Liu here, Professor Liu, let me ask you, because we witnessed some similar situation when Haiti was also suffering from an earlier earthquake. And during the reconstruction and also rehabilitation process, the money coming from certain members of the international community really are not going through the government channel. As a result, even today, this crisis is still going on in that country. So this is the argument coming from those for the government channel. There are, of course, different reasons that others would argue why they shouldn't go through the government channel. But at this critical stage, I mean, debate should be needed as long as it's healthy, but the thing is, how can we get things done and get things done efficiently? We're talking about lives here, Professor Liu.
Yeah, I think coordinated efforts is a priority, but in the meantime, transparency is equally important to really to shore up the confidence of the international community, and also the will of the donor will have to be respected. So therefore, given the current situation, rationally, what is the best approach? The coordinated efforts. However, due to certain mistrust, I think as long as they are contributing to the welfare and relief of these people, and they should be permitted.
Here's the thing. Where does the money come from? This is the most practical thing that we are talking about here. Some suggest, of course, there are the friendly countries, including China, India, and several others, and also international donors that can help. But also, there are new ideas, for example, with AIIB. After all, Nepal is one of the 57 founding members of AIIB. Of course, at this moment, the structure of the Infrastructure Investment Bank is still being finalized. The rules are being finalized. But the thing is, can Nepal, in a way, get this support?
I'll clarify a point because it's related to this question.
Go ahead.
First of all, the Prime Minister's office has opened up channels for aid to come directly to NGOs. It has to come to Nepalese NGOs. There's a lot of NGOs and interest groups that are vying for influence in Nepal. Nepal is between the tiger and the dragon, India and China. It's a very important location strategically in everybody's agenda. So there's a lot of agendas and a lot of interest. The Nepal government is very clear about their own development path. They don't want to disrupt the environment. As you can see, it is a very fragile environment in the Himalayas. So now you also have the major donor institutions that are going to start to vie for interest. Of course, discussion even earlier today on CCTV about the AIIB came up. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank can play a role. Of course, Nepal is looking to them, and just a little while ago, news has come out that the IMF has created an immediate relief fund for Nepal, also vying for interest. Of course, these are different agendas. And I think while infrastructure roads are critical, right now this is the biggest headache because the road system into China to Nepal has been struck today even harder than the previous quake, and that has disrupted the supply lines, medical lines, which are absolutely critical, especially in this monsoon rain season.
So your point is?
My point is there are different forces. IMF, AIIB will all be looking for influence, but the Nepal government will want to control their own redevelopment process. And among the people in the street, the word Nepal Rising has been really a sort of voice of solidarity. Local NGOs have done a heck of a lot on the ground.
All right. We have also been hearing reports coming from Nepal about the Nepalese government suggesting international and foreign militaries are not needed anymore on the ground because the Nepalese military could also fly their own helicopters to the devastating areas. Before we go, let me ask you, Mr. Zhang, given the fact that some of the neighboring countries, including China, for example, since we are talking about China-related issues here on this program, had the experience of dealing with devastating after-earthquake situation, as we have talked about Wenchuan, which killed enormous amount of people of our own. How much can China and others contribute about practices after the earthquake? Mr. Zhang, briefly.
I think Nepal has to be more open to receiving international assistance. The Nepal army does not have the choppers, does not have the air capabilities to reach remote areas, to make aerial drops, to rescue and evacuate people. I think we should be more open to foreign aerial missions, including from, of course, China, India and the West. I think, as you said, China has suffered an earthquake very recent, 7 years ago. Today is an anniversary, and which killed many people. We have to get the best practices from across the world, and we have to be more open. Sovereignty is important, and the government has to be at the center of relief and reconstruction efforts, yet the government has to be open to the experiences that all our neighbors and friends have gone through.
Professor Liu, shock-resistant housing, building infrastructure. Chinese have learned a hard lesson during the after the Wenchuan earthquake. How much really can China contribute in that regard?
I think, it can be regarded as on two phases. For the first phase, people need shelter, particularly with the coming monsoon rain season, and then they need a permanent housing. So I think China has really accumulated a huge amount of experience and also drawn from lessons that in the construction design and particularly in the location of the towns and the villages.
Rehabilitate.
Right.
How can you do that?
And the material selection, the organizational work, I think, which is even more important than the material and location. So they're and also prioritize, with different processes.
I see. Obviously, another devastating day for the country of Nepal, but we are talking about the road ahead. We want to thank the three of you gentlemen for coming over to our discussion. Lawrence Fromm, Liu Baocheng, and also Pershan Zhang. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here.
Thank you, Tianwei.
Thank you. Stay with us here on World Insight. We've got more coming up, including Wenchuan remembered. 7 years after the devastating earthquake, locals deal with the legacy of disaster. And economic boost. China's central bank cuts interest rates for the third time in 6 months in a bid to stimulate growth. But will that happen? You're watching World Insight on CCTV News, coming to you live. May the 12th marks the 7th anniversary of a catastrophic earthquake that you've seen here that struck Wenshuan County in southwest China's Sichuan province. At least 100,000 people were killed, injured, or declared missing in the disaster. Now, 7 years later, CCTV's Liu Yang takes us to the epicenter of the quake in Yingxiu County over there.
Lunchtime is the busiest for Yang Hejiang's restaurant. People from all over the country come to see the rebuilding of this quake-stricken county and the people who remain 7 years after tragedy struck. Yang Hejiang is the sole survivor of his family, and the trauma has had a lasting impact on his life. After the earthquake, everything had to be rebuilt from scratch.
We created a better living environment with our own hands. The country gave us the house to live in, but we need to work hard in the life if we want it to get better.
Yang has since remarried and now is father to 2 beautiful girls. Life seems to have restarted and come back to some sort of normal. With this small restaurant running, the family is also using their own apartment as bed and breakfast for travelers. Yang's wife is optimistic about their family business.
I think gradually we'll have more places to travel in Yingxiu. More highlights will attract more travelers to come here. They will like its peaceful environment. I hope our children will grow healthily.
From immense scale destruction to today's full recovery, the peaceful streets, rows of brand new apartments, the once distracted county is now a travel destination. We see from their eyes the resilience and the strong hope for a better future ahead has certainly kept the local residents positive through grim times.
I hope my hometown won't have another disaster. I hope the mountains get greener, the polluted water cleaner, and the smoky sky more blue. It will give us peace in our hearts.
In 2009, the rebuilding process started, with the government issuing the overall plan for the post-Wenchuan earthquake recovery and the reconstruction. Yingxiu was the epicenter of the quake. Other areas such as Wenchuan and Beichuan counties were also affected severely in 2008. According to government data, $137 billion was spent on the rebuilding quake-affected areas. 7 years after disaster struck, the psychological rebuilding process is still ongoing. But there's hope, at least for some locals, that things will one day seem normal again. Liu Yang, CCTV, Yingxiu County, Sichuan Province.
As long as there is hope. Stay with us here on World Insight. Our final segment is Straight Ahead. Boosting the economy, China's central bank announces yet another interest rate cut in a bid to stimulate growth. We'll see what's happening next. Welcome back. For our next topic, we stay in China, where the central bank has made a big announcement. The People's Bank of China is yet again lowering benchmark lending and deposit rates for financial institutions. It's the third cut in the last 6 months and comes as economic growth rates continue to slow.
A bid to boost the economy. With growth rates on the downward slide, China's central bank is taking action. Benchmark lending rates have been cut by 25 basis points to 5.1%, the third reduction since November. One-year benchmark deposit rates have also been cut by the same amount. The new rates take effect from Monday. Bank officials say the move aims to spark economic activity by lowering the cost of borrowing for the real economy.
These measures have been implemented because economic indicators from the first quarter show downward pressure on the economy. One key source of these pressures is the manufacturing sector. Profits are shrinking, but financing costs are still relatively high. These rate cuts will lower the cost.
The rate cut coincides with moves to raise limits on what banks can pay savers. It's hoped all these measures will provide a boost to the economy, with growth rates on course to hit their slowest in a quarter of a century. Some are calling it the Chinese version of quantitative easing, but Chinese experts say this isn't the case.
So far, the policies we have adopted are still normal measures to combat slowing economic growth over a short period of time. It's misleading and not scientific to compare these measures with the quantitative easing Western countries adopted after the financial crisis.
One sector that's set to benefit the most from the cuts is the country's sluggish housing market. Cheaper bank loans, together with lower down payments, will likely boost consumer confidence and increase home sales in major cities. But now, the big question is whether those rates are going to drop even further.
I believe there is still room for 1 or 2 more interest rate cuts. And I believe the sluggish growth will improve in the second quarter. But we still need to adopt a series of reforms.
Before today's rate cut, it had just been a little more than 2 months since the central bank made the same move. It's too soon to say whether the latest cut will be effective, but with growth rates continuing to slow, the economy may need another boost in the near future.
And for more on the latest situation of the Chinese economy and the Chinese policy about it, we are joined in the Beijing studio by Mr. Xu Sitao, who is the chief economist at Deloitte China. And also in New York, we have Mr. Max Wolf, professor of economics at New School University. Meanwhile, in Singapore, we have Dr. Tan Yip, co-director of Asia Competitiveness Institute at National University of Singapore. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. First of all, Mr. Xu, let me ask you about the interest rate cut from the PBOC. Many see it as a way to stimulate the Chinese economy, but how much really will a role that be?
Well, first of all, China has many tools in her box, as Premier Li Keqiang has said, because inflation is very low. Commodity prices falling, unlike other emerging markets. So this is perfect for rate cut. More to come. I think this is going to be a new normal.
More to come. I have to follow up a little bit. Of course, the PBOC will not make any statement about more to come, but what is letting you to believe so? More to come, exactly how many more do you think might be appropriate?
So, for example, reserve requirement rate right now is about 15–16%. If you look at reserve requirement rate in late 90s, early 2000, it was 5%. So you could cut that by 10 times easily.
All right, Mr. Wolf, listening to the Chinese analysts talking about the Chinese policies, what kind of impression you have? What do you make of this policy and probably more to come, quote unquote?
Sure, so I do think we're seeing very measured action from the PBOC here, so they're giving themselves a lot of runway. I do think it's ironic and confusing to some commentators that the U.S. is now about to begin a very timid normalization of interest rates, which involves raising them here, and has backed off of its quantitative easing, just as the second and soon-to-be largest economy in the world in China moves in exactly the opposite monetary policy direction. That's caused some confusion. I do think in order for this to be fully effective, you're going to need to see a little bit more aggressive fiscal policy component to come alongside the monetary policy interventions. But I would also expect at least 2 more monetary policy interventions, although I think they'll be gradual. I think they'll be very small and measured like we've seen. And I think the idea is to stop as immediately as soon as you can.
Dr. Yip, what do you make of this right balance, as Professor Wolf just mentioned, between the monetary and also the fiscal policies, which of course are 2 important, very important tools for the Chinese government right now?
Well, I think the PBOC's lowering of interest rates itself is not enough. I think the cost of the problem to lower the cost of borrowing, and I think the banks' interest rates should be fully liberalized, that state-owned banks should not be protected. They should allow the market to decide the lending rate for customers. There are activities in unorganized money market where small and medium enterprise have to face very high borrowing costs. So I think if you stop protecting the state-owned banks, allow interest rate to be freely determined by banks according to market forces, I think the small businesses can therefore gain lower borrowing costs, and that will help their business.
Well, this is the right logic, yes, indeed, Dr. Tan, but the right logic might not happen overnight, as is the process to implement all of these possibilities. Therefore, let me ask you, Mr. Xu, compared to that, what do you think about the immediate effect of the current policies? And how is this woven together with what Dr. Tan just mentioned?
Sure.
Of course, what he mentioned is not the whole picture. There are many other things to be done also. Mr. Xu.
Well, basically, China is in the process of this very rapid interest rate liberalization, caused mainly by internet and grassroots movement. So at the same time, I think central bank is very much supportive. So for example, the last move, deposit rate can be as high as 150% of official rate. So I think China is doing interest rate liberalization. So of course, if you look at any country's experience in this environment, short-term interest rate have little room to fall. That's why you need to cut reserve requirement rate. And potentially, you may also have to adjust the exchange rate. And I think China actually is sacrificing a lot for not adjusting exchange rate, mainly for the sake of regional stability.
Great point over there. Professor Wolf, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I do think there's an interest rate component as well as a currency component. I think the other thing we really can't sort of leave off the table in this discussion is the history of Chinese liberalization has a lot to do with the strength of the Chinese economy. Not unique. In almost any government, in almost any context, in almost any economy in the world, folks are usually more willing, there's more political will to experiment with deregulatory moves when the economy is in stronger shape. And what we are seeing here is a deceleration of growth to below or around the 7% target, which, while that would be a dream for many countries, is literally a multi-decade growth rate low in China. And if you know the history in China, more radical deregulatory policies very rarely survive and flourish in relatively difficult economic moments.
We are talking about 2 things, I think. One is, what about the current policy that we see now with PBOC going to work for the short period of time to stimulate the economy, at least to a certain extent? The other thing is, if the economy is getting better, what other things needs to be done? So let's focus maybe on the first task first.
Sure.
Mr. Xu, many consider this, as Professor Wolf just mentioned, not the best time of the Chinese economy, even though China argues it is going through a transitional period of time of the economic structure. The thing is, can this rate cut be regarded as a quantitative easing, QE, as they say, measure coming from China? Or is it in any way comparable to other economies while they are facing some economic difficulties?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's not quantitative easing based on a Western definition, because interest rates are way above zero, right? For example, deposit rate is between 2 to 3%.
Right.
But at the same time, China has been using so-called quantity to control credit. At the same time, and in fact, according to the latest announcement from Ministry of Finance, has to do with maturity extension, so on and so forth. So what the central bank is doing and what the central bank will be doing, effectively lowering the risk of local government debt and corporate debt. So you may argue central bank indirectly is purchasing local government debt. But this is not the Western style quantitative easing.
Yeah, exactly. We need to explain all of things so our international viewers
Yeah.
would understand exactly what is the nature of this policy. Dr. Tan, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think the exchange rate appreciation should be slowed down. You know, that China is getting into new normal of 7%, but at the rate it is going, I'm afraid it is not new normal, it's abnormal growth when it declines so rapidly. So I think China have to think of ways to contain business costs through lower interest rate and move the production into central and western China to restore export competitiveness. Now, if you don't do that, the new normal will turn into abnormal time where potentially you may sink into the middle income trap.
All right.
When your export is no longer competitive and your currency appreciates too quickly.
We are going to talk about the middle income trap or not in our later program. But let me ask you this, Dr. Xu. This is interesting because all the others are more concerned about Chinese economy than the Chinese are at this moment, because the Chinese see it as a transition, while others see, well, your numbers have changed so dramatically. So how much really the number does matter to the Chinese? 7%. I don't want you to go into a whole paragraph of explaining the 7%, but exactly, does this number that we are having right now really alert us at all?
No. I think a lot of China watchers are attaching too much importance to the 7%. The reality is unemployment rate is now rising. Labor market actually is doing very well. So at this point, I don't think we should be worried about whether it's 7% or 6%. I think this is a new normal. We should just embrace it
and do what needs to be done.
Yes.
And talking about what needs to be done, earlier we also heard from our panelists talking about the middle income trap. Yes, indeed, we've also hearing some of the Chinese finance officials talking about that. Earlier, in late April, Chinese Finance Minister Lou Jiwei, in fact, warned that China may be on course toward the middle income trap. The term refers to a phenomenon where a rapidly growing economies stagnate at middle income levels and fail to graduate into the ranks of high income countries. Take Brazil, for example. As an example, in 1974, for example, Brazil reached $1,000 per capita GDP and become a middle income country. But by the year 2010, the economy had only broken the $10,000 mark by 2010. They still haven't joined the ranks of the high income countries yet, which begins at just over 12,000 per capita. Of course, this is something that's already happening to some emerging economies, so the concern is whether it's going to happen to China. In fact, Minister Lou raised that up. It's not the first time he raised that up. He raised that up several times, several years ago, in fact. The thing is, are we getting closer to the danger that Minister Lou was worried about?
No, but I think what Minister Lou, what he has said is actually very pointed and refreshing, because I think what he was trying to say is we shouldn't be obsessed with the GDP growth rate. If we are so obsessed with GDP growth rate, then we will have a lot of wet elephant project. So in the end, productivity growth is not catching up. So in fact, before, actually right after he became the finance minister, I think he said in one of the informal occasions, it's okay, even economy growing at 6%. So I really believe.
But this is not a signal for our international investors right now, because that's a kind of way of illustrating.
My interpretation is just we should be relaxed, just not obsessed with this 7%.
Relaxed on number, but certainly not relaxed in terms of actions to take in order to make sure the system works. Dr. Tan, your input here.
Yeah, I think we have done some work on middle income tax, middle income traps for Chinese provinces. I think it's not useful to talk about middle income trap for China as a whole because the states, the provinces are so diverse. So we've done some work on middle income trap by province. And Guangdong province is unlikely to be in middle income trap. So this is some of the work we have done, and we are continuing to do more at subnational economies level.
Okay.
So if you don't improve your productivities, if education not continue to be widespread, and potentially some provinces in China may get stuck in the middle income trap. So this is very real. And I would like to suggest that we should look at the regional variation in China and really look at those provinces who potentially could be trapped and what can be done to make sure that they transit like East Asia tigers.
All right. Professor Wall from New York, let me ask you this. We are talking about actually several things. One is the immediate task, what policies can do to stimulate the economy. Yet we are not concerned about the slowdown of the growth because it is part of the transition. And meanwhile, we're also talking about the next part, which is what are the policies need to be solicited for the overall general development of Chinese economy. Professor Wolf, what do you make of this middle income trap concern? And secondly, is China getting closer or ever away from it, given the policies you have just witnessed?
So I think it's always wise to be concerned about the middle income trap in all circumstances because it is a real phenomenon and we've seen it many times, and there are certain things about the Chinese development story that mean we should be very nervous. That being said, the productivity growth, the education growth, and I think really ultimately the ability to move up the value-added chain in production is what delivers people from the risk of the middle income trap, and probably no one has done that better in 20 years, move up the value creation chain and the value added game than the Chinese economic story. So I think the Chinese are uniquely able to avoid it, but it's always a real risk. It's always something one pays attention to, and if you don't, it's dangerous, and you don't want the macro economy to remind you of that. In terms of the lower growth, I think, look, the global economy is going through a structural change, in part led by just shifts in who's powerful and where commodities come from and who's the workshop of the world. China is a leader in the emergence of a new global structure, but China herself is going through a difficult transition. If you don't have lower GDP numbers, then you're not really going through the transition. So it's short-term pain for long-term gain. It is the right type of scenario to see. However, just because you have short-term pain doesn't always mean you get the long-term gain.
Exactly. That's the right logic I think you have just mentioned. Before we go, Mr. Xu, let me ask you this. We've seen all the policies smartly being proposed and also taken place in China. But the thing is, what is going to be the key in transitioning of the economy, in making sure the economy, even in the short period of time, is going to be stimulated to a certain extent, it's going to continue healthily? Particularly the employment is going to be at a very good level. What is the key as the economist you see?
I think the key right now is to avoid a large fiscal stimulus as we have experienced painfully in 2008.
Right.
Accept a slower growth rate, speed up financial liberalization, interest liberalization, implementing registration system in equity market so that you change the mix of financing for firms. At the same time, I think the government is talking about cutting taxes, streamlining administrative approvals. I mean, today I think the Prime Minister has laid a foundation for tax cut. I think those are the right measures.
Don't be confused by some of the immediate results.
Right.
Always look at the middle term and also the long term. We want to thank the three of you, certainly, gentlemen, for your insights in the middle term and also the long term. Xu Sitao here in Beijing, Max Wolf in New York, and also in Singapore, Mr. Tan Ki-yep. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, you can certainly visit our website. Just type in World Insight, CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. I'm Tian Wei from myself and all the World Insight team. Thanks for watching, and join us again tomorrow for more global perspectives and stories from across China and around the world. Goodbye.